The power goes out. For most people, that means hunting for flashlights and waiting an hour. For others, it means something much worse, depending entirely on where they happen to live. Some American cities, when the lights go out, become genuinely dangerous places very fast. Others just become uncomfortable in ways that escalate quickly. Here are the 10 major US cities you don't want to be stuck in during a blackout. Number 10. New York City, New York. New York has a history with blackouts, and none of it is particularly reassuring. The most instructive example is July 13, 1977. Lightning struck a substation north of the city, triggering a cascade of equipment failures. And by 9:37 p.m., all 5 boroughs were dark. What followed was not the communal, help thy neighbor experience the city had managed during the 1965 blackout. This time, looting broke out across 31 neighborhoods within hours. The New York City Fire Department responded to 1,037 fires that night, including 14 multiple alarm blazes. Along a single stretch of Broadway in Brooklyn, 134 stores were looted and 45 set on fire. The NYPD made 3,776 arrests, the largest mass arrest in the city's history at that point. The total damage was estimated at around $1 billion in 1977 currency. The city was already under pressure. Deep in a fiscal crisis, the Son of Sam murders had the public on edge all summer. Unemployment sat at 12%, and a brutal heat wave was pushing temperatures above 90 degrees. When the power went out and business owners had already gone home for the night, the combination proved catastrophic. As Time magazine put it at the time, the blackout illuminated 12 years of change in the character of the city. The 2003 Northeast blackout was a different experience. It knocked out power to 55 million people across 8 states and Canada, and New York handled it with considerably more order. But 4,000 people were still trapped in stalled subway trains underground. Airports closed for hours, and the economic cost was estimated at $6 to $10 billion. Today's New York is a city of 8 million people stacked into high-rises, utterly dependent on functioning elevators, electric subway systems, and water pumps. A study of Queens neighborhoods found that some saw up to 147 power outages over a 3-year period, with average outage durations of around 20 hours, longer than most major cities in the state. The grid is old, the population density is extreme, and when it goes wrong, there is nowhere to go. The density itself is the core problem. In a typical American suburb, a blackout is inconvenient. In New York City, it's a cascade of simultaneous failures. Elevators in 40-story buildings stop. Water pressure in high-rise apartments drops because the pumps keeping it flowing lose power. The subway, which moves about 3 million people on an average weekday, grinds to a halt, trapping people in tunnels below street level. Grocery stores lose refrigeration. Cell networks get overloaded with everyone calling at once. Traffic signals go dark, turning every intersection into a negotiation. In the summer, the heat in those same high-rises builds without air conditioning until the apartments become dangerous, especially for older residents and anyone without the means to leave. New York's Con Edison utility serves approximately 10 million customers and operates one of the most complex urban grids in the world. That complexity is both a strength, it allows for sophisticated rerouting during failures, and a liability because the more interconnected a system is, the more ways it has to fail in unexpected combinations. The Christmas Eve 2022 cold snap was a recent reminder. Con Edison struggled to maintain adequate natural gas pressure during the demand spike, and utility officials later said privately that a full grid failure had been a genuine possibility. If natural gas pressure drops far enough that gas service has to be cut to protect pipeline safety, restoration has to happen home by home, pilot light by pilot light. In a city of 8 million, that is not a short process. Number 9. Houston, Texas. Houston holds a unique distinction. It is arguably the most repeatedly and expensively blackout-prone major American city in recent history, and it keeps setting new records in the wrong direction. Houston residents experienced Hurricane Ike in 2008, then Hurricane Harvey in 2017, then the February 2021 winter freeze, then a powerful derecho in May 2024, and then Hurricane Beryl in July 2024. That last one, a Category 1 hurricane, not even a particularly severe storm by Gulf Coast standards, knocked out power to nearly 3 million homes and businesses at once. More than a week after Beryl hit, hundreds of thousands of customers still had no electricity, while temperatures rose into the high 90s and the heat index pushed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The numbers from the Washington Post's modeling are stark. A 48-hour blackout during a heat wave in the Houston metro area could kill between 600 and 1,500 people over 5 days. With the grid functioning normally, the same heat wave would cause around 50 deaths. Houston residents, according to data from grid monitoring company Whisker Labs, are 2.7 times more likely to experience a power outage than the average American. After Hurricane Beryl in July 2024, the human picture was difficult to look at. Hospitals closed and then reopened. 16 hospitals operated on generator power. Patients who had been shot waited more than a day for emergency room admission because hospitals were full and operating below capacity without electricity. Hundreds of thousands of customers went more than a week without power and heat that pushed the index past 100 degrees. More than 100 cooling centers opened across the region, many of them in libraries and community centers that had also lost power and had no backup generators. Professor Dave Cortez of the Sierra Club's Lone Star chapter put it plainly: "We are living with 20th century infrastructure in a 21st century climate crisis." Texas runs on its own independent power grid, ERCOT, which has limited connections to neighboring grids. When it struggles, there is no easy way to draw emergency power from elsewhere. During the winter freeze of 2021, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission later determined that the Texas grid came within 9 minutes of a total collapse that would have left the entire state dark, potentially for weeks. The infrastructure question there isn't hypothetical. It's a repeating event, and the intervals between events are getting shorter. Number 8. Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix may be the most medically straightforward entry on this list. The math here is not complicated. The city regularly records temperatures above 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and in 2023, it endured 31 consecutive days at or above 110, a record that destroyed the previous mark of 18 consecutive days, set back in 1974. On 3 days in July 2023, the city hit 119 degrees. The overnight low on July 19th that year was 97 degrees. In 2023, Maricopa County, which encompasses Phoenix, recorded 645 heat-related deaths, a 52% increase over the previous record set just 1 year earlier. Those 645 deaths represented more than half of all heat-related deaths reported across the entire United States that year, according to CDC data. Now add a blackout. A 2023 study modeled what would happen if a multi-day power outage coincided with a Phoenix heat wave. The findings: approximately 12,800 people would die, and close to 800,000 would require emergency care for heat-related illnesses, a number that would overwhelm the city's roughly 3,000 emergency room beds by a factor of over 250. The city's director of emergency management, Brian Lee, acknowledged publicly that the scenario is not theoretical. Parts of Phoenix lose power during monsoon activity regularly. Phoenix's extreme temperatures are a function of both climate change and the urban heat island effect, which has added an estimated 5 additional degrees above the global warming baseline. The city has been investing in cooling centers and heat response systems, which have shown results. Heat deaths in 2024 dropped to 602 from 645 in 2023, despite 2024 being the hottest year on record. But those systems depend entirely on the grid functioning. Without power, the cooling centers go dark too. Number 7. New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans sits below sea level. Large portions of the city depend on electric pumps running continuously to drain water. When the power goes out, the pumps stop. When the pumps stop, the flooding begins. The city's relationship with blackouts is both recent and well documented. Hurricane Katrina in 2005 knocked out power to 2.6 million customers across the Gulf Coast and in the hardest-hit areas of New Orleans. Power wasn't fully restored for over 6 weeks. Hurricane Ida in 2021 was nearly as brutal. It caused near-total grid failure in the region, coinciding with sweltering summer heat, and the Louisiana Department of Health reported that 10 people died from heat in the days that followed Ida's passage across the state, as one Washington Post report noted at the time. Cars and generators eventually run out of fuel, and service stations cannot pump gasoline without electricity. Researchers who analyzed outage patterns along the Gulf Coast found that extended outages of 8 hours or longer were particularly common along the Mississippi River corridor, and that the greater New Orleans region experienced some of the longest outage durations in the dataset. Louisiana's residents are statistically more likely to be living in poverty, in mobile homes, and without access to backup power than residents of most other states, making recovery from any extended outage harder at every level. In May 2025, a forced outage ordered by regional grid operator MISO cut power to over 100,000 customers across New Orleans and surrounding parishes. City Council President J.P. Morrell said afterward, "The public deserves clear answers regarding the reasons behind this incident and the failure to provide timely alerts. We are urgently working to uncover the facts." It was not the first time those words, or something close to them, had been spoken by a New Orleans official standing in the dark. Number 6. Miami, Florida. Miami's problems during a blackout are primarily about the combination of intense heat, hurricane vulnerability, and the particular challenge of a city that is already half underwater in its planning scenarios. Florida, as a state, has consistently ranked among the highest in the country for weather-related power outages. The peninsula is hit by more hurricanes and tropical storms than any other part of the contiguous United States, and Miami sits at the southern tip of it. Hurricane Irma in 2017 left more than 6.7 million customers across Florida without power, more than any hurricane since records began. In Miami-Dade County alone, restoration took days to weeks, depending on the neighborhood. Miami's summer heat index regularly exceeds 100 degrees and can approach 110 on the worst days. In that environment, a blackout is not just uncomfortable, it is medically dangerous within hours for the elderly, young children, and anyone with pre-existing health conditions. The city has a large population of older residents and a significant proportion living in high-rise buildings without natural ventilation, which become heat traps when air conditioning fails. The city also sits roughly at sea level, making flooding from storm surge a near-constant risk during hurricane season. When flooding, wind damage, and power loss combine, which they do regularly, the cascading failures compound each other. Roads flood, so repair crews can't reach damaged infrastructure. Substations flood, delaying restoration, and the heat keeps building. Miami-Dade County has over 2.7 million residents and a relatively limited road network for evacuation, given that it is bounded by the Everglades on one side and the Atlantic Ocean on the other. In a serious blackout scenario following a major hurricane, residents face a narrow set of options: stay and cope with the heat and flooding, or try to leave on roads shared by millions of other people trying to do the same thing. Gas stations that can't pump fuel because they've lost power are a documented feature of post-hurricane Florida. During Hurricane Irma's approach in 2017, gas shortages in South Florida were reported days before the storm even made landfall. Add a blackout after the storm, and the calculation for getting out becomes significantly harder. Number 5. Chicago, Illinois. Chicago doesn't get credit for this, but it probably should. The Windy City has one of the more underappreciated blackout risk profiles in the country, specifically because the danger runs in two very different directions. In summer, an extended blackout during a heat wave is a serious threat. The 1995 Chicago heat wave killed an estimated 739 people over 5 days, one of the deadliest weather events in the city's modern history. And most of those deaths occurred because people were isolated in hot apartments with no ventilation, often afraid to open windows in high-crime neighborhoods, cut off from anyone who might check on them. The city's public health response in 1995 was widely criticized as inadequate and slow. A blackout during a similar event would be considerably worse, No fans, no way to charge phones, no way to call for help if those around you don't know you need it. Chicago's ComEd electrical system serves roughly 4 million customers and was built out over decades using infrastructure that is, in many sections, well past its designed lifespan. The city has been piloting new grid resilience technology, including a resilient electric grid system that connects substations so that a failure at one can be compensated by drawing from another. It's a promising upgrade, but progress is measured in years, and the coverage is not yet universal. In winter, a blackout becomes a different kind of threat entirely. Chicago regularly sees temperatures well below zero, and natural gas infrastructure, which supplies both electricity generation and direct home heating, becomes stressed during extreme cold snaps. The NBC News review of federal records found that in 5 of the 11 years preceding 2024, parts of the U.S. grid were hit by blackouts or near failures during cold weather events. Chicago sits squarely in the zone where a sustained winter outage transitions from inconvenience to life-threatening in a matter of hours for anyone without an alternative heat source. The city's economic inequality adds another layer. Power restoration in major outages consistently prioritizes critical infrastructure and wealthier areas first. Neighborhoods that were already underserved before the lights went out tend to wait longer. That's not a Chicago-specific problem. It's a nationwide pattern. But in a city with Chicago's level of economic stratification, the gap between who gets restored in 6 hours and who waits 3 days can be substantial. Number 4. Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles is a city so dependent on its infrastructure that it barely functions when everything is working. Take away electricity, and the whole picture changes fast. California has experienced some of the most dramatic grid stress events in recent American history. During the August 2020 heat wave, the California Independent System Operator ordered rolling blackouts affecting over 800,000 customers. The first such emergency blackouts in the state since the energy crisis of 2001. During the September 2022 heat wave, when temperatures in Los Angeles County climbed to record levels, grid operators came within striking distance of ordering another round of rotating outages. They sent out emergency alerts, asking residents to reduce electricity use immediately. For a city like Los Angeles, the specific challenge is its sprawl. The metropolitan area covers over 500 square miles, is almost entirely car-dependent, and has relatively few walkable options for reaching cooling centers, food, or water during an extended outage. In a blackout scenario where gas stations can't pump fuel, the city's freeway system becomes a very large and expensive parking lot. And unlike a city with a functioning public transit network as a backup, Los Angeles offers limited alternatives. California's power lines have also been directly implicated in starting wildfires, an issue that led Pacific Gas and Electric to adopt a policy of deliberate power shutoffs, called public safety power shutoffs, during high wind and fire risk conditions. In October 2019, PG&E cut power to approximately 700,000 customers across Northern California. That policy, while intended to prevent the ignition of catastrophic fires, demonstrated just how quickly a planned outage of that scale disrupts daily life for millions of people. In Los Angeles specifically, the January 2025 wildfires, which destroyed thousands of structures in Pacific Palisades, Altadena, and surrounding communities, served as a reminder of how quickly the region can shift from normal to catastrophic, and how heavily the rest of the city's infrastructure bears the strain when it does. Power lines were knocked out, evacuation routes clogged, and cell service degraded across wide areas. For a city that sprawls the way LA does, with wealth and poverty sitting a few miles apart, the distribution of who gets help first and who waits is never uniformly applied. In a major blackout, that inequality becomes very visible, very fast. Number 3. Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis doesn't make most people's mental list of vulnerable American cities, and that's part of the problem. The city sits on the New Madrid seismic zone, one of the most active earthquake fault systems in the continental United States. A major earthquake along the New Madrid Fault, which produced a series of massive earthquakes between 1811 and 1812 that were felt across the eastern half of the continent, would be catastrophic for Memphis's power infrastructure. The grid in the region was not designed with seismic resilience as a primary consideration, and the combination of an earthquake with the region's aging distribution infrastructure could produce outages lasting not days, but weeks. FEMA has conducted multiple studies on the New Madrid scenario, and the findings are consistently sobering for the Mid-South region. Beyond the seismic risk, Memphis has consistently ranked among the cities with the highest violent crime rates in the United States. The FBI's uniform crime reports have placed Memphis near or at the top of major cities for violent crime on multiple occasions in the past decade. A sustained blackout that disables alarm systems, street lighting, and security cameras in an already high-crime environment creates conditions that historically correlate with significant spikes in criminal activity. The 1977 New York blackout is the most famous example of this dynamic, but it is not unique to New York. Memphis also has a substantial medically vulnerable population, a high proportion of residents with diabetes, heart disease, and other conditions that require refrigerated medications, powered medical equipment, or consistent climate control. The combination of an aging grid, a major fault line underneath, a challenging public safety environment, and a vulnerable population makes this city substantially more fragile during an extended outage than its regional profile might suggest. Number 2, Detroit, Michigan. Detroit is a city that has been doing more with less for a long time, and the power infrastructure reflects that history. The city has been losing population since the 1950s, from a peak of nearly 1.85 million residents in 1950 to under 650,000 today. That depopulation has created a situation where aging utility infrastructure is spread across a large geographic footprint, but maintained for a significantly smaller customer base. The revenue that utilities need to fund upgrades and maintenance is compressed, while the cost of maintaining the physical footprint of a much larger city remains high. The result is a system that is older, less frequently upgraded, and serving a population with fewer economic resources to cope when it fails. Michigan's weather adds significant stress. Detroit experiences genuinely extreme winters. Temperatures routinely fall well below zero, and ice storms can take down overhead power lines at scale. The state has been identified in multiple research studies as one of the regions with the highest frequency of long-duration power outages in the country, along with Louisiana and Arkansas. A study published in the journal Nature Communications identified northern Michigan as one of the 4 highest risk clusters in the U.S. for outages affecting already vulnerable populations. In Detroit specifically, a winter blackout affecting older housing stock, much of which is poorly insulated and relies on electric heat, becomes dangerous within a few hours. There are neighborhoods in Detroit where the housing is 80 or 100 years old, where insulation is minimal, and where many residents are elderly or in poor health. When the heat goes out at -10 degrees and the power company's restoration timeline is measured in days rather than hours, those are the households where people get hurt. The city's financial constraints over the years. Detroit declared the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history in 2013, have limited investment in infrastructure hardening, and the recovery time from any major outage event tends to be longer than in cities with more resources and a denser, wealthier customer base to spread maintenance costs across. Number 1. San Juan, Puerto Rico. Technically a U.S. territory and not a city in the traditional sense, but San Juan is the largest city in Puerto Rico. It is subject to U.S. federal infrastructure standards and federal disaster response, and what happened there set a benchmark for how catastrophically wrong a grid failure can go. Hurricane Maria made landfall on September 20th, 2017, and destroyed virtually the entire electrical grid across the island. All 3.4 million residents lost power. For San Juan and the rest of Puerto Rico, restoration was not a matter of days or weeks. In some rural areas, it took nearly 11 months to restore electricity. The storm and its aftermath killed an estimated 2,975 people, many of whom died because of loss of medical care during the prolonged outage. What Puerto Rico's experience documented in the most explicit terms possible is what a truly extended, total grid failure looks like for an urban population. Hospitals ran on generators until they ran out of fuel. Dialysis patients missed treatments. Refrigerated medications spoiled. Cash ran out at banks. Food supply chains collapsed. The entire modern infrastructure of a city simply requires continuous electricity to function. And when that electricity stops for months, not hours, the consequences reach into every aspect of daily life. Puerto Rico has been working toward grid modernization and microgrids since Maria, driven partly by the recognition that its grid cannot survive another storm at that scale. But San Juan today remains on a system that FEMA, researchers, and utility engineers have repeatedly flagged as inadequately hardened for the hurricane exposure it faces every single season. As one federal energy report noted after Maria, the question is not whether, but when the next major failure of the grid will occur. Every city on this list has the same underlying problem in some form. Infrastructure built for a world that no longer exists, facing conditions that are getting harder to manage every year. The grid that powers American cities was largely constructed in the mid-20th century. 70% of US transmission lines are more than 25 years old and approaching the end of their typical 50 to 80-year lifespan. The number of major weather-related power outages has been rising steadily for decades, and the US Energy Information Administration has documented that the average duration of power outages nearly doubled between 2013 and 2021, from around 3.5 hours to over 7 hours. That trend is not moving in a reassuring direction. None of this means these cities are uninhabitable. Millions of people live in all of them and manage fine. But it does mean that the gap between a functioning city and a struggling one, when the power goes out, is a lot thinner than most people think about on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The things that make cities livable, elevators, water pressure, food refrigeration, medical equipment, traffic signals, gas pumps, electronic payments, cell service, all run on the same grid. When that grid goes down for long enough, they all go together. The cities on this list got here through a combination of weather exposure, aging infrastructure, population density, geography, and, in some cases, the economic constraints that have made it harder to invest in upgrades. Those are real, structural factors that take years and enormous amounts of money to change. In the meantime, they're worth knowing about. If any of these cities are on your radar, or if you just found yourself nodding along to one of them, drop a comment and let us know which one surprised you most. And if you want to keep seeing this kind of research-heavy, no-fluff content, please hit the like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel keep going. Thanks for watching.